The moment I stepped into the boardroom, I knew something was off. It wasn't the silence. I was used to quiet meetings. It wasn't even the founder's face, expressionless as always, unreadable behind his designer frames. No, it was the girl, standing outside the glass wall. She wasn't in the room, but close enough to watch. Blonde, sharp blazer, barely 30. Hands clasped calmly in front of her, like she belonged there. She was smiling. I took my seat at the end of the table, still expecting what I'd been told earlier that week. Recognition, a thank you, maybe even an announcement. After all, I had just salvaged our multi-million-dollar supply deal in Germany after Riley, our logistics director, fumbled the coordination. But there was no mention of the German deal. The founder cleared his throat. Eliza, thank you for coming on such short notice. We're making some structural changes. Structural changes? My pulse ticked up. No prep? No agenda? No pre-read packet? He continued. We've decided to bring in new blood, someone with strong ties to the founding vision. The door opened. She walked in. My mouth went dry. It was her, the intern, the one who couldn't even format a quarterly summary report 3 months ago. I had taught her how to build pivot tables, how to present key metrics in 3 slides, not 30, and now she stood at the head of the table while I sat at its foot. The founder placed a hand on her shoulder. This is Riley. She'll be joining the executive team immediately. You two already know each other, I believe. I couldn't speak. I could barely blink. He smiled, and added, She's also my daughter. I'm proud to finally introduce her. There it was. Not just a new hire, not just a promotion. This was placement, installation, a quiet handover cloaked in the word restructure. And me? I wasn't introduced. I wasn't thanked. I wasn't even asked to stay. The meeting moved on without me. And the girl outside the glass took my seat. I didn't cry. Not when they ended the meeting without looking me in the eye. Not when Riley slid into my seat like she'd always belonged there. Not even when I passed my own assistant in the hallway and she gave me a look of helpless apology. I didn't cry, but I couldn't breathe right, either. Back in my office, former office, I opened the cabinet where I kept a photo of my mom and me at her last treatment milestone. She had just rung the bell, marking 6 months in remission. That day, I'd told her not to worry about the bills. The insurance at Halden was the best in the industry. I'd made sure of it when I helped write the benefits package myself. Now, I stood in that same room, packing boxes with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. No one came in. No one said a word. I wrapped the photo in a scarf, stuffed it into my tote, and slid my badge off the lanyard around my neck. The lanyard was a gift from our Berlin partners, engraved with my name and title, Chief Strategy Officer. The last time I'd see those words printed together. As I approached the elevator, I noticed how quiet the floor had become. The kind of quiet that doesn't come from productivity, but from people holding their breath behind glass doors. I swiped my card. Beep! Access denied. I stared at the reader. Swiped again. Beep! Access denied. I stood frozen, cheeks burning, like the system itself was rejecting me. The security guard from the lobby noticed. Ms. Hartwell, may I? I hated the way he said Ms., not Eliza. Like I was suddenly someone else, a stranger, a file marked former employee. He scanned his MasterCard, and the elevator chimed open. I stepped inside without a word. The doors were almost closed when I heard footsteps behind me. Hurried but soft. It was Mia, from Analytics. She reached in and pressed the hold button, slipping a plain white envelope into my hand. No words, just a nod. Eyes glossy. I looked down. A sticky note on the envelope read, You'll need this, to remind them who built this place. I didn't open it. Not yet. When the doors closed again, I gripped the envelope tightly, feeling something hard and plastic inside. A USB. The elevator began its slow descent, but my thoughts dropped faster. No one had fired me outright. No one had thanked me either. No cake, no speech. Just a badge that no longer worked and a daughter with the right last name. I exited into the lobby, heels clicking on marble that suddenly felt foreign. At the exit, I turned one last time, not to look back at what I'd lost, but to prepare myself for what I would become. And as the sunlight hit my face, I finally felt the sting of it all. Not the job, not the office, not the title, but the way they erased me while I was still standing there. The truth didn't come all at once. It came in quiet fragments, half sentences, old memories reframed, and a phone call I never expected to make, after the elevator humiliation. I went home and sat in my living room for nearly an hour without moving. My purse sat on the floor where I dropped it. The envelope from Mia unopened on the coffee table. My phone buzzed constantly. News alerts, unread emails, a couple of awkward texts from colleagues saying things like, "I didn't know what to say," and "You didn't deserve that." None of it helped. None of it mattered. But there was one message that caught my eye. A single line from an old colleague. "You might want to ask Marcus. He's the only one who ever knew the whole story." Marcus Hale, former general counsel at Halden and Knox. He left the company a year ago after what they called a difference in vision. At the time, no one said more. Now I realized no one was allowed to. I called him. He picked up on the second ring. "Eliza," he said softly. "I was wondering when you'd call." There was no small talk. I went straight in. "Is she really his daughter?" Silence on the line. Then a heavy sigh. "Yes. Riley was born out of a settlement arrangement back in the early 2000s. The founder met her mother during the investor roadshows. It was delicate, but yes. She's biologically his. The board was never informed." I sank back into my chair, heart thudding. "So how long have they been grooming her for this?" "She's been taking private mentorship calls for about 6 months," Marcus said. "Virtual sessions with the founder, business case studies, leadership development modules. She's been shadowing remotely under an alias." "Under an alias," I repeated, disgust curling in my throat. "And no one thought to tell anyone actually running the company?" "They didn't need to," Marcus replied. "The founder didn't want her entry questioned. He wanted her positioned without resistance. You were the only real threat." I closed my eyes. It wasn't just that I'd been replaced. I'd been erased in advance. "Here's something you should know," Marcus added after a pause. "About a year ago, she came into the office, just once. She was introduced as his niece." I opened my eyes. "Wait, when?" "November. You were out in New York for the strategic summit. She walked through the main floor, sat in your office, took pictures. I saw it myself." I suddenly remembered something. A framed photo on my desk, one of the few personal things I ever kept there, was missing when I came back from that trip. I'd chalked it up to someone cleaning too aggressively. Now it clicked. She had been there, sat in my chair, smiled at my team, taken pictures, maybe even rehearsed the future they were preparing for her, I whispered. He let her wear my skin before he even cut me out of it. Marcus didn't respond. He didn't have to. The betrayal wasn't just personal. It was systemic, methodical. A removal by slow replacement. So quiet it felt like my own memory was the one lying. Before we hung up, Marcus added, "I can't say this officially, but check the shareholders' access logs. I think you'll find that Riley had a security ID before her name was ever put on paper." I thanked him, though I wasn't sure for what. The truth didn't make it hurt less. It just gave the pain a sharper edge. That night, I opened Mia's envelope. Inside the USB was a folder labeled Build History Eliza. Documents, blueprints, internal roadmaps, all with metadata showing my name as the original author. But the part that broke me wasn't digital. It was a printed photo. A photo of Riley sitting in my chair, holding a Halden and Knox branded mug, smiling wide. The photo had a date, November 14th. The caption, scrawled in someone's handwriting, read, "The future of Halden." There are different kinds of silence. The one that comes from awkwardness, the one that comes from mourning, and then the kind that follows a slap so loud everyone pretends they didn't hear it. I was in the middle of sorting medical forms for my mother's treatment, trying to figure out how to shift her care to a new provider without the company insurance, when my inbox lit up. Subject line, "Let's talk about the dead weight." The sender, Riley Halden, sent not just to her strategy team, not just to leadership, but to everyone, from junior data analysts to finance interns, from security to legal. Over 400 people received it in real time. I opened it on reflex. I shouldn't have. The message began like a typical internal directive, moving forward. Fresh direction. New strategic alignment. The usual corporate word, salad. But then came the part that stopped me cold. We're finally shedding the relics. Some legacies are better left in glass cases. You can't build the future with fossils. There was no name, but everyone knew who she meant. She didn't need to spell it out. The sentence that ended me. Leadership isn't about who did what a decade ago. It's about who has the vision to take us beyond next quarter. It was a clean-cut execution, and I couldn't even defend myself. My cursor hovered over the reply all button for a full 30 seconds. I imagined typing something razor-sharp, something that would cut through her polish and expose the arrogance underneath. But my fingers didn't move. Instead, I closed my laptop and sat still, hearing the blood pound in my ears. It wasn't just the insult, it was the fact that it came from inside, from the person who'd shadowed me silently, smiled through meetings, nodded while I mentored. She'd studied me long enough to know how to humiliate me with precision. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed. It was Mia again. "Check the internal Slack. Channel all staff." I opened it with dread. The message thread was mostly unread. A few confused reactions. One sarcastic and then one comment from Jonah, a soft-spoken engineer who never said much. He'd worked under me in the early years, back when our entire R&D team fit into a shared workspace with flickering lights and no heating. His comment was just 2 lines. "We would be nowhere without her. Some fossils carry the fire." That one reply stayed up for 12 minutes. Then the entire thread was deleted. Admin locked. The shame didn't go away. Not immediately. I imagined Riley sitting at her desk, realizing what she'd done. Maybe panicking, maybe laughing, maybe both. She hadn't just insulted me. She'd done it in front of everyone. She'd made it public. And in that moment, it hit me. This wasn't clumsy or impulsive. It was strategic. She wanted to erase me retroactively, make it so that my name, my legacy, would feel like an inconvenience, something they had to apologize for. My office? Gone. My badge? Deactivated. My contributions? Undermined. Now. Even my memory was being rewritten. I texted Marcus, attaching a screenshot of the email before it disappeared. "Still think she's not being coached?" He replied 1 minute later. "No, this is full-scale narrative control, and it's not just coming from her." I stared at that sentence. Not just coming from her. So this was bigger than one reckless heiress trying to claim a chair she hadn't earned. This was systemic, sanctioned, planned, that night. I didn't sleep. I printed out Jonah's comment and taped it above my desk. "Some fossils carry the fire." She thought she'd buried me under shame, but all she did was remind me where my fire lived. The cursor blinked beside his name. I hadn't spoken to Elliot March in over a year, not since the quiet shuffle of his exit from Halden, framed publicly as a personal leave, but internally whispered as he pushed too hard. back then. I didn't ask questions. I was too busy fixing everything Riley broke in her trial runs under the radar. But now, with my reputation freshly flattened under a public insult, and my mother's treatment plan hanging in limbo, I was out of reasons not to reach out. The file I pulled from the envelope Mia gave me had reminded me who I used to be, and buried in my emails-starred folder, archived and ignored, was a subject line I couldn't forget. If you ever decide to build something that matters, call me. It had come from a group called Aviron Ventures, a clean energy investment collective with a reputation for quiet wins and quietly dangerous vision. I hadn't responded back then. Halden was my life. And loyalty, for better or worse, was my default setting. Now, with my default erased, I clicked call. 3 rings, a sharp breath. Elliot March! There was a pause before I spoke. My throat was dry, but my voice came out even. Elliot, it's Eliza. A beat of silence. Then, like a slow curtain lift, a spark returned to his tone. Eliza Hartwell, I've been waiting for this call. I allowed myself a faint smile. Took me long enough. Not at all, he said. I always knew you'd call when it mattered. He didn't ask why. He didn't need to. By now, Riley's mass email had made the rounds. Industry moves like that don't stay contained. I'd become the cautionary tale of the week. I expected formalities. What I got instead was a meeting invite. 3 o'clock. I'll bring the partners in. We've been building something, but it doesn't work without a system. Your system. I blinked. You mean that? Eliza, he said. You weren't a strategist. You were the infrastructure. You were the compass. The call ended, but my hands trembled afterward. Not from fear, but from something quieter, older, something I hadn't felt in weeks. Belief. At 3:00 p.m., I joined the call. Elliot, leaner than I remembered, but still sharp-eyed, introduced the team. 5 partners, all ex-corporate, all burned in one way or another by the legacy systems they'd helped build, and all ready to build something better. They didn't need me to start from scratch. They had the funding. They had the framework. What they didn't have was someone who knew how to bridge the reality of operations with the poetry of purpose. That's where I came in. What's your role now, Elliot? I asked during the final 10 minutes, already scanning the shared folder of product development timelines. He smiled wryly. Interim CFO. Again. But only until we finalize our leadership board. He leaned back in his chair. By the way, I never got to thank you. Back at Halden, you spoke up in that budgeting meeting. You stopped Riley from cutting the R&D line. I thought she'd come after me, I said quietly. She did, he replied. Just not immediately. That landed harder than I expected. Welcome to Avron, Elliot added. Or should I say, welcome back to your own future. That night, I walked into my kitchen and opened the calendar my mom kept by the fridge. She had circled her next treatment date, 2 weeks away. I hadn't had the heart to tell her the insurance was gone, that everything we'd fought for together was sitting in review under Cobra paperwork. But now, I had options again, not out of revenge. Not yet. This was something softer, something steady, a quiet step toward reclaiming the pieces they hadn't managed to destroy. Not all courage looks like fire. Sometimes, it's just the calm hand reaching for the phone when every voice in your head says, don't. The first time I saw the Aviron logo printed on glass, it didn't feel real. It was barely a logo, just placeholder font on a taped sheet of paper stuck to a frosted glass door. The ink had smudged in the humidity. The hallway still smelled like new paint and dust. But to me, it was sacred, because for the first time in weeks, I wasn't walking into someone else's vision. I wasn't reporting to a legacy or protecting someone's ego. I was stepping into something I was building from zero, with intention. Aviron wasn't just a company, it was a second life. We rented the 5th floor of a modest tower in the same innovation district where Halden's headquarters sat. In fact, if you stood by the south window of our office and looked across the plaza, you could see Halden's 11th floor conference room, the same one where they'd announced Riley's arrival while I sat. Silenced and replaced, it was Elliot's idea to lease that floor. Visibility, he said with a knowing grin. Symbolic friction. I had to admit, it worked, every morning. I took the elevator to 8:15 a.m. meetings with product teams and saw Halden's windows lighting up across the skyline. And every time I saw the silhouettes of executives walking inside those rooms, I didn't feel rage. I felt clarity. We kept my involvement quiet at first. Publicly, I was listed as Special Operations Advisor, a vague enough title to keep press and investors away. But inside Aviron, everyone knew I was the Axis. We started with a 6-person team, Elliot as acting CFO, 2 engineers formerly from a European battery lab, a marketing lead from a solar startup, and Mia, who left Halden 2 weeks after the mass email debacle. I hadn't expected her to follow me, but she showed up one morning with a flash drive, her resignation letter, and a small potted plant. "They won't even notice I'm gone," she said, "but I'll notice if I don't do something that matters." Her words mirrored something I'd been writing in my journal for days, but hadn't said aloud. I'm done proving myself. Now I just want to build something that outlives me. By the end of the first month, we'd mapped out Aviron's product roadmap. It wasn't flashy, just smarter. We weren't trying to be louder than Halden. We were trying to be right. And right meant a modular energy storage system that didn't require rare earth metals, a cost model that made our solution viable in emerging markets, patent pathways that kept control in the hands of creators, not just the board. I oversaw the technical architecture myself. Late nights with dry erase markers and half-eaten Thai takeout, drawing system diagrams while Mia cross-checked sourcing logistics. Every sketch reminded me why I stayed in this industry in the first place. Not for money, not for titles, but because innovation should never belong to the loudest person in the room. It should belong to the most prepared. It was 9:30 a.m. when I got the first request for a meeting from one of Halden's former investors. The subject line was simple. "Is there space for a conversation?" I didn't respond right away. I watched the email sit there for a full minute, pulsing on my screen. I thought about the girl in the elevator, the one who clutched her badge after it turned red. I thought about my mom's calendar on the fridge, about Jonah's comment on Slack, about that photo of Riley sitting in my chair like she already owned my past. Then I clicked reply. There is, but the terms have changed. By the time the sun set, we had 3 new contracts under review, a short list of angel investors, and a wait list of engineers who had heard Eliza Hartwell might be building something. And as I stood by the south window, watching the conference lights flicker off inside Halden's 11th floor, I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt ready, from the outside. Halden still looked polished. The glass glistened under the morning sun. The logo hadn't changed. Reception still greeted guests with scripted warmth. Even their LinkedIn page posted curated thought pieces twice a week about redefining innovation. But beneath that shine, things were cracking, and I didn't need access to see it. Halden's silence was louder than any press release. Over the past 3 weeks, I'd heard whispers from vendors, vague social media rants from employees, and 2 resumes sent to Aviron from ex-Halden staffers, each marked confidential, each carrying a trace of desperation between the lines. Then came the lithium contract. Halden had negotiated an exclusive sourcing deal with Nexora, a mid-tier supplier based in Nevada. Known for its reliability but strict delivery terms, the contract Riley had personally pushed through required final approval and a secured logistics window within 10 business days of invoice issue. Simple enough, if you knew what you were doing. She didn't. she missed the submission deadline by 4 hours, which, under the contract clause, triggered an automatic penalty. Halden was bumped to the end of the next available supply cycle, 45 business days out. In other words, they had no lithium core shipments for the next 2 quarters. I found out by accident, or rather, because someone forgot to revoke my access that afternoon. I was reviewing a schematic in a Viron's conference room when I saw a new notification ping my old work account, which I'd kept logged into a separate offline archive out of habit. I hadn't touched it in weeks. But now, blinking in the top right corner, was a subject line I hadn't expected. Order hold, Halden and Knox. Please confirm new recipient contact. The sender, procurement at Nexora. The recipient, ehartwellhaldenknox.com. My old email, still active in their vendor portal, still CC'd as the primary point of contact on a 7-figure materials deal. I clicked. The body of the message was blunt. Following our last agreement, please advise updated lead for internal handling. Prior contact, E. Hartwell, not responding. Shipment window missed. Hold initiated. I leaned back in my chair, heartbeat slowing, not from shock, but from something cooler, something steadier, like watching a thread unravel exactly as you predicted. I didn't respond. Of course, but I did forward the message to Elliot. He called me back within 10 minutes. Tell me I'm not seeing this right, he said, voice low but electric. You're seeing it right. Did they really leave you listed? I guess someone forgot I was ever there, I said. Or someone hoped you'd keep cleaning up after them without being seen. That silence again. But this time, I didn't fill it. I let the moment stretch, because something in me wanted him to feel it too. He exhaled. They'll try to patch this, probably call Nexora, beg for an override. They won't get it, I said. Nexora doesn't renegotiate clauses. That's why we use them, strict but predictable. And now Halden's pipeline is frozen for 2 quarters. Elliot muttered, That's catastrophic. I didn't reply, but the truth was, I didn't feel triumphant. Not yet. What I felt was the eerie calm of a long, patient strategy taking root, the kind of quiet that comes not after a scream, but after years of being silenced. That night, I stayed late at Avaron. The team had gone home. The office lights dimmed behind me as I stood by the south-facing window, looking out over the courtyard toward Halden's building. Their conference room was still lit, 8:40 p.m., judging by the warm amber hue, and I could make out shadows pacing back and forth. Emergency meeting, damage control, probably Riley explaining a minor logistics error, but even from across the plaza, I could tell, whatever she was saying, no one was nodding. The glass between us couldn't transmit sound, but it didn't have to. I recognized that kind of silence. It was the same one I sat in when they pushed me out. Only now, it wasn't mine anymore. Some people wage war with fire. I chose paperwork. It started with an RFI, request for information, from Halden's corporate development department, sent to a generic inbox at Avaron. The language was overly polite, almost scripted. We're exploring strategic partnerships with early-stage clean energy firms. We've been impressed by your recent traction and are interested in exploring alignment in our lithium alternative space. They had no idea who we were. That's how well we built the mask. From the beginning, I knew I couldn't be the public face of Aviron, not yet. If they had seen my name, they would have pulled out, pivoted, retaliated. Riley wouldn't have just blocked the bid. She would have burned the ground beneath it. So I created distance. Our CEO on paper was Renata Quinn, a seasoned startup consultant with a reputation for clean exits and polished investor calls. I had trained her personally during late-night prep sessions, feeding her every nuance of our core technology, product roadmap, and market strategy. Renata wasn't a figurehead. She understood the vision. She just didn't know how personal it was for me. To the world, she was Averon's founder, a cool, technical woman with no visible baggage or vendettas. Her story was safe, which made it the perfect shield. Halden's team requested a call. Renata agreed. I joined silently, off camera, listed as product director. I muted my mic and let them talk. It was a Thursday, 11:20 a.m., and I remember that because sunlight hit Renata's desk at just the right angle. She wore a navy blazer and a soft expression. Nodding politely as Halden's director of innovation introduced himself. His name was Craig Monroe. I knew him well. He'd once tried to poach my lead engineer by offering a pay bump and a corner desk. The irony wasn't lost on me. Craig leaned forward. We've been following your battery performance reports. Your adaptability curves under heat load are, well, let's just say they're better than anything we've built in-house. Renata smiled. We're proud of our results. And you've filed provisional patents? 3, she said evenly. Full filings underway. Craig cleared his throat. We'd be open to licensing discussions, possibly even equity participation, if that's of interest. I glanced at the screen, watching his posture. He thought this was the easy part, the part where a small team gets flattered into folding. But Renata didn't flinch. Our current investors are committed, she replied smoothly. We're looking for partners, not owners. Craig chuckled. Of course. Still, let's not close any doors. I watched them wrap the call with pleasantries, already picturing the email Craig would send Riley. Great team, smart leadership. We could absorb this without a ripple. Except nothing about this deal would be smooth or clean. After the call, Renata turned to me. You think he bought it? I nodded. He bought the version of the story we wrote for him. That's all that matters. So, she paused. How much longer do you want to keep your name off the table? I looked out the window. Halden's tower loomed across the skyline. A boardroom full of people who once thought I was indispensable. Now circling our product like vultures around something they thought they could claim. I answered quietly. Until they sign? We prepared the proposal package that same afternoon. Licensing terms, usage boundaries, penalty clauses, every page designed to look standard, but baked with precision traps, clauses that would only activate under specific conditions, most of which Halden had no idea they were about to trigger. I had spent 15 years building systems for other people. Now I was building safeguards, for myself, and beneath all the structure and silence, one fact pulsed steadily. They were bidding for technology that only existed because they pushed me out. They didn't know it, but they were negotiating with the ghost they created. And this time, I wasn't showing my face. I was showing them what it looked like to lose to the name they erased. I didn't need applause when the deal went through. I didn't need confetti, or handshakes, or congratulatory champagne. What I needed was for the paperwork to say exactly what I'd spent 3 sleepless weeks engineering into it. Quiet control. Halden and Averon signed the MOU at 10:00 a.m. on a Thursday. Just over 2 months after Riley had paraded me out of the boardroom I built. The meeting took place over video. Everyone smiling through stiff Zoom squares and careful corporate smiles. Craig Monroe signed on behalf of Halden. Renata signed on behalf of Averon. I wasn't in the frame. I didn't need to be. But the document had my signature, just not where anyone expected it. One signature, 3 pages deep, small font, footnote section, Legal Appendix F, Clause 18EF, Executive Continuity Provision. Entiete. In the event of a change to the leadership board, CEO, or executive control structure of Averon Dynamics within 24 hours prior to or following the signing of this agreement, the licensing contract becomes void without penalty or further obligation. It was a clause that looked like boilerplate, just another protective clause buried in legalese. Aviron's legal team had reviewed it. So had Halden's. Neither raised a flag. Because to them, nothing had changed. And that was the trick. At 11:58 p.m., the night before the signing, I sat in a quiet conference room on the top floor of the Aviron building. The city outside was a constellation of motionless light. Beside me, Elliot laid out 2 folders, one for public record, one for internal governance. He didn't say much. He just passed me a pen. "Are you sure?" he asked. I nodded once. Not loud, not bold, just certain. Then I signed. Eliza Hartwell, Chief Executive Officer, Aviron Dynamics. No announcement. No social post. No corporate memo. It wasn't about theatrics. It was about the clock. By 12:01 a.m. I was CEO. By 10 o'clock a.m. Halden had signed a binding agreement that was already broken, and I didn't have to say a word. The confidence didn't come from ego. It came from design. I had spent years writing terms like these for other people. I'd built contracts meant to last through acquisition, failure, betrayal. I knew how to write insurance into paper, now. I was the insurance. At 2:30 p.m., Elliot called me from the downstairs lobby. He was breathless with something between awe and dread. "They're asking to renegotiate." "Already?" Riley's name was removed from the executive registry this morning. Internal source says the board forced it through after the lithium debacle. I turned away from the window, where Halden's silhouette still loomed across the plaza. And? And they don't know what just happened? Yes, they do, I said softly. They just haven't admitted it yet. That afternoon, I walked the long way around the building, past the corner cafe Riley once liked to hold her PR coffees in, past the bench where I'd once taken my mother's call after her 3rd round of chemo. I entered through the loading dock. It was symbolic. In a way, I didn't want a front entrance moment. I didn't need a grand return. What I wanted was to sit in my office, and feel the quiet weight of what had just shifted. Aviron's team was calm that day. No high fives, no cheers, just quiet nods, soft smiles, and an energy that vibrated like a current under our skin. They didn't know all the details yet, but they felt the shift. Renata came in around 4:15 p.m., a folded paper in her hand. "Halden just submitted a revised term sheet," she said. Desperate tone. Stripped half the licensing value. Dropped all equity asks. I unfolded it, scanned the headers. "They're pretending they still have leverage," I murmured. She paused. "Do we tell them?" I looked up. "Not yet. Let it breathe. Some victories don't need headlines. Some power moves live best in the shadows. And some clauses, if written right, don't forgive. They erase. Power doesn't always enter the room with fanfare. Sometimes. It calls on a landline no one uses anymore. Inside Halden's glass-paneled executive boardroom. The atmosphere was tense but performative. Everything had been staged for the signing. The contract, a bold, multi-million-dollar licensing agreement with the rising startup Aviron, sat neatly printed in a leather folder, branded pens aligned, catering trays untouched, and a camera crew stood ready to snap what they thought would be the redemption shot of the quarter. Craig Monroe, Halden's director of strategic partnerships, stood at the head of the table, rehearsing lines in his head. The comms team had given him a statement to read once the contract was finalized. Neutral tone, optimistic phrasing, something about next-generation collaboration. It was 9:31 a.m. The only thing missing was Aviron's final signature. A young associate leaned over to Craig. Still no confirmation from their counsel, just waiting on the digital timestamp. Craig forced a smile and nodded, though the knot in his stomach tightened. They've had every document for 3 days. This is routine. He didn't sound convinced. And then, the desk phone rang. The hardwired one, meant only for internal emergencies or priority-level executive calls. The room fell silent. Even the catering staff froze mid-step. Craig picked it up slowly. "Craig Monroe," he said. The voice on the other end was crisp, calm, unmistakably familiar. "You'll have to renegotiate. With me." Click. The line went dead. For a moment. The room was suspended in disbelief. Then Craig's complexion drained to white. His fingers slackened. The receiver slipped slightly in his grasp. "Eliza," he whispered. "That was Eliza." A moment later, his phone buzzed with a Slack notification. Then another. Then 3 more. He tapped in, eyes darting left to right as each message loaded in real time. 9:32 a.m. Urgent. Licensing agreement voided. Clause 18F. Triggered due to executive change at Averon. 9:32 a.m. Press alert. Finance media outlet The Current has scheduled a breaking story drop at 9:55 a.m. 9:33 a.m. Legal internal. CEO signature change timestamp submitted. Compliance flagged auto termination. Clause validated. Craig didn't even look up as one of the camera operators stepped toward him, asking, "Are we ready to begin the ceremony?" He didn't answer. He just stood there, blinking at the Slack messages as if willing them to disappear. Around the room, executives began murmuring. Legal advisors flipped through hard copies of the contract, searching for the hidden clause they had missed. Finally, someone said it aloud. Clause 18F. She wrote that, didn't she? Years ago? Another voice, lower and more resigned, added, "She's been writing our protections longer than Riley's even been in this building." They all looked at Craig. He sat down. Across the plaza, in Averon's office tower. I stood by the window with my phone still in hand, watching the aftermath unfold from 11 stories above. I didn't feel nervous. I didn't feel rushed. I didn't even feel smug. What I felt was certainty, control. At 9:32 a.m., Halden had signed a deal already undone. The clause had been activated the moment I filed the change of control paperwork at 11:58 p.m. the night before, with no announcement, no press, just a timestamp and my name. Once again in its rightful place, Eliza Hartwell, Chief Executive Officer. The papers had already done the work. No screaming, no confrontation, just leverage, crafted, timed, and buried under their own signatures. Renata stepped into my office, holding her tablet. "They've seen the alert," she said. "They're stalling the photographers now. Craig looks disoriented." I nodded. "He should be." She hesitated. "Do we respond?" "Not yet," I said. "Let the silence get louder." By 9:45 a.m., Halden's internal servers were overloaded. The finance team panicked. 2 board members left early for calls. And in the midst of it all, someone at Halden finally clicked into the metadata of the contract draft and saw the real timestamp. It didn't lie. The new CEO of Averon had been appointed hours before the deal was executed. Halden had legally committed to a deal that no longer existed. They couldn't sue. They couldn't threaten. They couldn't even explain it publicly without admitting they'd failed to review their own contract thoroughly. They had walked into their own trap, and I didn't even have to push the door closed. At 10 o'clock a.m., the headlines dropped. Former Halden strategist outmaneuvers $18 million contract with a midnight clause. Clause 18F. Goes viral in corporate law circles. Meet the woman who wrote it. Eliza Hartwell's silent strike. I turned off my phone, sat down at my desk, looked out at the skyline, and for the first time since they erased me, I didn't just feel visible. I felt powerful. They called it sudden. That was the word in every headline, in every talking point from Halden's damage control team, and in every stiff-lipped analyst's morning commentary. Unexpected contract fallout shakes Halden and Knox. Licensing void triggers chain reaction. Investors caught off guard. Sudden leadership transition leads to stock nosedive. But I knew better. There was nothing sudden about it. The collapse had started the moment they erased my name from the door. At 10:45 a.m., Halden's stock dipped another 9%. That made a total drop of 22% since market open. The phones in their investor relations department were reportedly ringing nonstop. By 11 o'clock a.m., two key venture partners pulled out of a secondary funding round. Someone leaked a transcript from the emergency board call. And a quote from their interim CEO, an empty suit compliance officer thrown into the spotlight, went viral. "We believed the asset was clear for use. We've since discovered the IP was not formally transferred." No spin, no polish, just resignation in a blazer. I watched it all unfold from the glass-walled strategy room at Aviron. The team didn't cheer. They didn't gloat. They didn't need to. The silence in the room was purposeful, reverent. They all knew what this meant, not just for Halden, but for every undercredited builder who'd ever been pushed aside so someone else could pose for the photos. Renata set down her phone and looked across the table. "It's out," I nodded. "Send it." At 11:22 a.m., Aviron released a one-page public statement. No press conference, no Q&A. Just the truth, printed and archived forever. The proprietary energy storage architecture central to the Halden and Knox licensing attempt, specifically the modular battery configuration, adaptive load balancing algorithm, and vertical integration pathways, was developed solely by Eliza Hartwell prior to her departure from the company. This technology was never transferred, sold, or assigned. All rights remain fully protected under U.S. intellectual property law, held by the original creator. Attached were the proof documents, timestamps, patent drafts, internal design logs, all signed, all mine. At noon, Riley Halden's name disappeared from the company's leadership page. 4 hours after the call, 2 hours after the clause detonated, 30 minutes after her lawyers tried and failed to contain the statement's spread. Her LinkedIn went private. Her publicist stopped returning press inquiries. And just like that, the woman who once sat in my office and smiled like she belonged there vanished into digital silence. I didn't feel pride. I felt rage. Still there, still hot, still raw. Not because I wanted her gone, but because she was never supposed to be there in the first place. They made room for her by deleting me. They handed her the blueprint I built, the strategy I coded, the relationships I spent a decade cultivating, and pretended she had earned them. That wasn't succession. That was theft. By 12:15 p.m., hashtags began trending. Clause 18F, Hartwell effect, built by Eliza somewhere out there. A 23-year-old intern was stitching together TikToks, comparing my silent exit to my even quieter return. I wasn't watching them. I didn't need to. What mattered most was that people knew now. Not because I shouted, but because the truth, once documented, doesn't need volume. It just needs oxygen. That evening, I left the office early. The city was gold and orange with late afternoon light. I took the long way home, past Halden's tower. A security guard I recognized stood just inside the revolving doors. He saw me through the glass. He didn't wave. He didn't nod. He just stood straighter, as if some part of him remembered who I was, who I'd always been. At the edge of the courtyard, I paused. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folded sheet of paper, Jonah's Slack comment from weeks ago. The one that had landed like a breath of air during my lowest moment. I'd printed it, laminated it, and carried it with me like armor. We would be nowhere without her. Some fossils carry the fire. I taped it quietly to the back of a park bench facing the Halden building. Then I kept walking. That night, I called my mother. She picked up on the second ring, voice soft from rest. "Hi, baby." "It's over," I said. "They can't use it. Not the product, not the strategy, nothing. There was a beat of silence. Then she asked, "Do you feel better?" I thought about that, not triumphant, not vindicated, but clearer, lighter. "Yes," I said. "I feel free." She laughed gently. "Then that's enough." They called it sudden, but collapse rarely is. Sometimes, it just waits for the right hand to pull the final thread. And this time, that hand was mine. The applause began before I even reached the podium. Not loud, not theatrical, just steady, rising. The kind of applause that doesn't follow fame, but recognition. The Global Future Energy Summit was being held in Singapore that year. The stage backdrop was a kaleidoscope of silver and soft green, emblems of a new era in sustainable design. Delegates from over 40 countries filled the tiered seats. Heads turned toward the stage as the announcer stepped forward. She smiled, eyes scanning her notes briefly before saying into the mic, "Our next speaker is not a legacy executive, nor the face of an old guard. She's the mind behind the next generation of clean storage infrastructure, the architect of the modular revolution. Please welcome Eliza Hartwell." No one said, "former Halden strategist." No one said, "the woman who was replaced." No. That label had been left in the ashes. This was new ground now. I stepped into the lights. Wearing navy, same color as the day I signed the clause that changed everything. My notes were folded once in my hand, but I barely glanced at them. "I spent 15 years building systems," I began, and nearly lost myself inside one. A pause. Not dramatic, just honest. But this moment isn't about what I lost. It's about what I reclaimed. Innovation isn't just circuitry or code. It's courage. The courage to leave a room that stops hearing you, and the conviction to build another, brick by brick, until the world has no choice but to listen. No more hiding, no more shadows. This was my name, spoken on my terms, in full light. After the speech, I exited backstage into a quiet hallway where organizers and aides were coordinating interviews. One figure stood apart from the crowd, a tablet in hand, headset tucked behind one ear. 5 minutes before Bloomberg, then Reuters. "Want me to cancel TechWire if we run late?" I smiled. "You're efficient as ever." "Jonah." He looked up. Older now, but the same earnestness in his voice, the same calm steadiness that had made his 2-sentence Slack comment weeks ago hit me harder than any speech. "We would be nowhere without her. Some fossils carry the fire." Back then, he had just been an engineer. Now, he was my executive assistant, by choice, by belief. He followed me when the storm broke. No questions, just a quiet. "Where do we start?" I thought about that first morning at Avron, when the office still smelled like fresh drywall and fear, when I still wondered if the world would ever see me again. And now here we were, sitting atop the global leaderboard of innovation mentions, with 3 patent families filed under Aviron's name and 1 under mine. Individually, we walked back toward the media wing, lights ahead, cameras waiting. I didn't flinch. Jonah leaned in and said, "They're calling this the Hartwell effect now." I raised a brow. "Better than Clause 18F, I guess." He grinned. "They're also quoting you." "Which part?" He pulled up the headline on his phone. "They tried to bury my name. Now it's carved into their failure and printed on the future." I laughed softly. "Not bad for a fossil." Some stories don't end with revenge. Some end with redefinition. I was never meant to be remembered as someone's understudy or collateral damage on someone else's ascent. I was meant to be seen for what I am, the builder of things that last. And now, they say my name, not as a footnote, but as the headline. If this story moved you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below. What part hit you hardest? Share this with someone who needs to reclaim their voice. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories that shine a light where others tried to shut it off. Because sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one who writes the future.